Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift off into the oddly peaceful world of Viking bedtime rituals. Picture this, it's a chilly evening in a Viking longhouse. The low hum of the fire crackles in the corner, while the room fills with the aroma of wood smoke and hearty food. Outside, the wind howls through the Nordic forests, but inside, it's warm and calm. Well, as calm as things ever got in Viking society. If you were a Viking, you'd probably be finishing up a long day of raiding, farming, or craftsmanship. And now you're preparing to ease into sleep. You're probably exhausted, but there's a lot more to their bedtime routine than just collapsing on a pile of straw. You probably won't survive a Viking bedtime yourself. Let's face it, you wouldn't last long on a bed of furs, with the smell of mead in the air. But hey, we're going to take it slow tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see where everyone's tuning in from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Vikings were far from the peaceful, romanticized warriors we often see in Hollywood films. They lived hard lives, filled with battles, adventures, and endless hard work. But when the day finally wound down, there was a shift, a much-needed transition into the nighttime. It wasn't just about the physical exhaustion. It was also about how they prepared themselves mentally for rest. After all, their world was just as demanding on the mind as it was on the body. Let's begin with the Viking night sky. As the day faded, the Vikings didn't just head to bed like we do. No, they had an entirely different way of marking time through the stars. Picture this. You're outside, the longhouse behind you, and the vast Nordic sky stretching above. The night sky, unlike today, wasn't filled with light pollution. No city lights to hide the stars. It was a breathtaking sight, and the Vikings were attuned to it. They used the stars to track not only the time of year, but also the seasons of their lives. In fact, the Vikings were exceptional astronomers, and their daily activities, from the timing of harvests to the best time to set sail, were often dictated by the position of the stars. The night sky was more than a backdrop to their lives. It was an integral part of their rhythm, and as the sky darkened, the routines would shift. You might have noticed that the sun doesn't set in the same way at different times of the year. In the dead of winter, when the sun barely rises above the horizon, the Vikings' sleep patterns would change accordingly. Historians still argue whether the Vikings adhered to a strict bedtime. But one thing's for sure, the night didn't begin just when the sun set. It began when the stars appeared. This wasn't a 9-to-5 society. There was a calmness in how they marked the day's end. You can almost hear the gentle sound of wood creaking as the longhouse settled for the night. It was the same sound you hear when the last of the day's chatter dies down and people start to settle into their space. Now imagine this, it's evening, and it's time for a hearty Viking meal. The air is filled with the smell of roasting meats and freshly baked bread. The Vikings loved their food, and dinner was not just about filling the stomach. It was a ritual. After a long day, they'd gather in the warmth of the longhouse, and food would be more than just sustenance. The meal signified the transition from the busy daytime to a more relaxed evening mood. Think of it like an old school version of winding down after a busy workday. Meals were often eaten by the fire, and it wasn't uncommon for people to share stories between bites. This wasn't a quiet, solitary dinner in front of the TV. No, meals were communal, and the Viking longhouse was a place of laughter, camaraderie, and the occasional loud conversation. In fact, you'd probably hear a lot of exaggerated tales about battles fought or treasure found. Even after dinner, however, there was a quiet sense that the night was setting in. The fire would continue to crackle, but the mood would soften, the laughter would become less frequent, and more people would begin to drift off into their corners. It's hard to imagine what life was like without the comforts we enjoy today, like a warm, soft mattress or cozy sheets. Vikings, on the other hand, had to make do with what they had. But even though their beds might sound uncomfortable, there was a certain practicality to it all. They slept on raised platforms made of wood, covered with furs or blankets. These weren't your typical beds. They were designed to keep you off the cold, hard floor. You wouldn't catch a Viking drifting off in a fluffy, queen-sized bed. No, they had a different idea of what it meant to rest. And although the sleeping arrangements might not sound luxurious to you, they were a perfect fit for the hardworking Viking lifestyle. But beyond the physical setup, the atmosphere in the longhouse was key. There was no electric light, no distraction from screens. You were surrounded by the sounds of the fire and the murmur of your fellow Vikings, and perhaps most importantly, the sense of being together in the same space, tucked away from the dangers of the outside world, was incredibly soothing. You see, while they didn't have our modern comforts, the Vikings did have something just as valuable, a deep sense of community, one that made the ritual of bedtime far more than just sleep. Now that the evening has settled into its peaceful rhythm, let's talk about how the Vikings transitioned from the hustle of the day to the quieter moments before sleep. A lot of this had to do with their ritual of dress down. Sounds simple, right? But in Viking society, what you wore mattered. The clothes you wore during the day were not just a reflection of your social status or occupation. They were an armor of sorts. When it was time to wind down for the night, the Vikings had a routine of changing out of their daytime gear and slipping into something more comfortable, whether that meant a simple shift or a loose tunic. It marked a transition into a more relaxed state of mind. Now, don't get me wrong, these weren't exactly luxurious nightgowns we're talking about. Vikings were practical people, after all. They didn't indulge in silk or satin. No, their nighttime attire was all about comfort and utility. For the Vikings, changing into more comfortable clothes wasn't about luxury. It was about signaling to the body that it was time to relax and settle down. It was a simple but important part of the process, one that separated the active part of the day from the restfulness of the night. And even though it might sound unimportant in the grand scheme of things, it was actually quite significant in Viking culture. Historians still argue whether this practice was universal across Viking society, but there's evidence that this dress-down routine was a widespread tradition. After all, changing clothes for comfort isn't a new idea. It's something we still do today when we throw on pajamas or sweatpants at the end of a long day. The Vikings simply had their own version of this ritual, designed to prepare both the body and mind for rest. Once the Vikings had settled into their more relaxed clothing, it was time to indulge in something that many of us can relate to, a drink to help ease the tension of the day. And no, I'm not talking about a modern cocktail. The Vikings were famous for their love of mead and ale, which was often consumed in the evening, both for relaxation and socializing. The quality of the mead varied, but it was often brewed with honey, berries, or herbs, giving it a slightly sweet, earthy flavor. And let's not forget about ale. Ale was a staple of Viking life, served not just for special occasions, but also as part of the everyday routine. Mead, ale, and other alcoholic beverages weren't just about getting tipsy. In Viking culture, drinking was a social ritual. It wasn't unusual for the Vikings to gather around the fire, drink in hand, and share stories of the day's events or grander tales of their heroic ancestors. In a way, these drinks acted as a warm-up for the stories to come, helping everyone unwind and transition into the more relaxed atmosphere of the night. Now, let's think about this for a moment. After a long day of raiding, farming, or other hard work, what better way to unwind than with a drink that both nourishes and relaxes you? Historians still debate whether these beverages had a literal calming effect, but there's no doubt they contributed to the communal atmosphere that the Vikings were so fond of. The clink of mugs, the warmth from the fire, the shared laughter. It was all part of the end-of-day ritual that helped the Vikings settle into their evening. But beyond the food and drink, there was something else that played a major role in Viking nighttime routines: storytelling. Now, you probably know that Vikings were famous for their myths and sagas. But did you know that the act of storytelling was also deeply tied to their nightly rituals? These stories weren't just for entertainment. They had a deeper purpose. In fact, storytelling was a form of relaxation and reflection that helped bring the community closer together before they fell asleep. Imagine this. You're sitting around the fire, a warm mug of mead in hand, and your fellow Viking begins recounting a story. Perhaps it's about the gods, or a great battle, or a legendary hero who fought dragons and monsters. As the story unfolds, the sounds of the fire crackling in the background, you feel yourself sinking deeper into relaxation. These stories were designed to do more than just entertain. They were meant to connect the Vikings to their cultural roots, to remind them of their place in the world, and to soothe their minds before rest. It wasn't just any random tale that was told either. The Vikings believed that stories had the power to shape reality. They were filled with symbolic meaning, whether it was the story of a god's sacrifice or a hero's triumph. These stories provided comfort, offering a sense of purpose and continuity, even when the world outside was filled with uncertainty. And as the fire flickered and the last of the mead was consumed, the stories wound down, signaling that it was finally time for sleep. Historians still debate whether Vikings saw storytelling as a spiritual act or simply a form of entertainment. But one thing is clear: the practice played a significant role in helping them unwind. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine yourself sitting by the fire, listening to a Viking storyteller weaving tales of adventure and heroism. The flames casting flickering shadows on the walls of the longhouse. It's easy to see how these stories helped calm the mind and prepare the body for sleep. As the Viking storyteller wraps up their tale, the embers of the fire are beginning to dim, and the room's atmosphere shifts again. The stories may have been calming, but now it's time to bring the day to a close in a more intimate way. Sleep rituals. The Vikings, like most ancient cultures, didn't just lie down and fall asleep. They had rituals that helped them prepare, both physically and mentally, for rest. The physical aspect of this ritual is something we can still relate to today: washing up and making yourself comfortable. Now, while the Vikings didn't have modern running water or indoor plumbing, they did practice cleanliness, and they did it in a very intentional way before bed. You might think of Vikings as rugged warriors who spent all their time raiding or living off the land. But they were actually surprisingly clean for their time. They bathed regularly, at least once a week, and had personal grooming practices that would have impressed even the most modern-day spa-goer. They would wash their hands and faces before settling in for the night, perhaps using a wooden comb to tidy their hair or beard. The idea of cleanliness wasn't just about hygiene. It had symbolic significance. To the Vikings, washing away the dirt of the day and preparing themselves for the night was an important act of renewal. This was the final step before sleep, making the transition from the busyness of the day to the peace of the night. Historians still debate whether the Vikings viewed personal hygiene as a sacred ritual, but there's little doubt that their commitment to cleanliness played a role in their sense of well-being. The act of washing and tidying up would have helped them mentally shift from the public demands of the day to a more private, restful state. In this way, their bedtime rituals were not just about physical rest, but about preparing for peace of mind. You can imagine how soothing it must have been to finish off the day with this cleansing ritual, especially when you've spent hours working, battling, or tending to the land. Once their bodies were ready for sleep, the Vikings turned to another aspect of their nighttime routine: the use of warmth. If there's one thing that stood out in Viking longhouses, it was the central hearth. The fire was the heart of the Viking home, providing light, warmth, and a sense of security. It wasn't just a place to cook food or light the dark. Vikings would sleep near the fire, both to stay warm and to feel the calming influence of its steady burn. The importance of the fire cannot be overstated. The hearth wasn't just practical. It was a focal point of the Viking home, a place where families gathered and individuals could feel connected to one another. As the flames flickered and the room darkened, there was a kind of soothing rhythm to the environment, the crackling of the fire, the soft shadows dancing on the walls, and the warmth wrapping around you. It all combined to create an atmosphere that was comforting and calming, just right for drifting off to sleep. In fact, the fire played such a central role in Viking life that it was often seen as a symbol of protection, safety, and continuity. It was their personal version of a nightlight, a glowing beacon that kept the terrors of the dark at bay. Historians still debate whether Vikings believed the fire had supernatural properties, but it's clear that they saw it as an essential part of their nightly ritual. Whether they viewed it as a symbol of warmth and protection, or simply a practical necessity, the fire's role in Viking life was deeply embedded in their bedtime customs. As the fire slowly dies down, it signals that the night is truly beginning and sleep is on the horizon. Now, let's talk about the sleeping arrangements themselves. We've already touched on the fact that the Vikings didn't have the luxury of soft beds like we do today. But what they did have were raised platforms covered with furs or blankets. These simple yet functional sleeping arrangements were a practical solution for the cold Nordic environment. Imagine lying on a bed of furs, elevated off the cold ground, with the fire still crackling in the background. It's not the soft, pillowy bed you might be used to, but it was an effective way to stay warm and comfortable for a night's rest. But it wasn't just about comfort. These raised platforms also had a communal aspect. Viking families often slept close together, not just for warmth, but for protection and a sense of security. The longhouse was a tight-knit community, and sleeping arrangements reflected this. While you might think of a Viking warrior as a solitary figure, their bedtime was far from solitary. Families, sometimes entire clans, slept in the same space, sharing warmth and comfort. There's something oddly peaceful about the idea of everyone being close together, safe and secure under the same roof. Historians still argue whether Viking sleeping arrangements were strictly for practical reasons or whether they had a deeper social or emotional significance. Some believe that the proximity of family members during sleep helped foster a sense of community and protection, while others suggest that it was more about keeping warm. Regardless of the exact reasoning, it's clear that the Viking bedtime ritual wasn't just about physical rest. It was about strengthening bonds and fostering a sense of security within the family unit. And then finally, we get to the quiet moments just before sleep. With the fire dying down, the family tucked into their furs, and the day's events fading from memory, it's time for that final transition into rest. The room is quiet now, the only sound being the crackling of the fire and the occasional soft breath from a family member. The world outside might be harsh and unpredictable, but in this moment, the Viking longhouse is a place of peace, warmth, and security. It's a stark contrast to the chaos of their everyday lives, a temporary haven where they could rest, rejuvenate, and prepare for the challenges of the coming day. As the night deepens and the room falls into an almost tangible quiet, the real magic of the Viking bedtime rituals takes over. Imagine this moment. The fire is now just a faint glow in the corner, casting long shadows that seem to dance across the wooden beams of the longhouse. The only sounds are the soft breathing of your fellow Vikings, the occasional murmur of someone turning over, and perhaps the distant howling of the wind outside. You're in a cocoon of warmth and comfort, tucked under your furs, and sleep is slowly creeping in, just beyond the horizon of your thoughts. But what about the mind? How did the Vikings prepare mentally for the kind of deep, restorative sleep that would ready them for the challenges of another day? For the Vikings, sleep wasn't just about physical rest. It was also a spiritual act, something that tied them to their gods, their ancestors, and their fate. You see, Vikings believed that sleep was a time when they could connect with the divine. It was during these quiet moments before sleep that the gods were said to visit their dreams, providing guidance or insight into the future. sleep wasn't just the end of the day. It was an important part of their spiritual life. In fact, many Vikings took great care in preparing themselves mentally for sleep, just as much as they did physically. For some, this meant offering a prayer or invoking the gods for protection during the night. Others might have used charms or amulets to ward off bad dreams or evil spirits. It was said that Odin, the All-Father, was particularly present during dreams, watching over the faithful and offering his wisdom to those who needed it. This connection between sleep and the gods was a comforting one. It reassured the Vikings that even in their most vulnerable state, they were being watched over by divine forces. Historians still debate the extent to which the Vikings believed that sleep was a sacred ritual tied to the gods, while some suggest that sleep was primarily seen as a way to rejuvenate the body. Others argue that it had a more spiritual significance, especially for the Viking warriors who lived in constant danger. The idea of divine protection during sleep would have been an incredibly comforting thought, especially given the harshness of Viking life. After all, these were people who spent their days fighting, farming, or navigating treacherous seas, and the notion that their sleep could be watched over by Odin himself must have brought a sense of peace. But it wasn't just the gods who occupied Viking dreams. The Vikings also believed that dreams themselves were a form of communication, a way for the gods to send messages, or for the dead to speak to the living. For example, the sagas tell of warriors who dreamed of their fallen comrades, and in these dreams, their friends would offer advice or warnings. This concept of dreams as messages was deeply ingrained in Viking culture. It wasn't uncommon for Vikings to share their dreams with others in the morning, hoping to gain insight or wisdom from their visions. And if a dream was particularly vivid or strange, it might be interpreted by a shaman or wise elder who could help decode its meaning. As the fire continues to crackle, you can almost hear the faint murmurs of Viking warriors whispering their dreams to each other, seeking answers, seeking connection with the divine. This practice, like so many others in Viking life, was deeply communal. It wasn't just about personal rest. It was about how sleep, and the dreams that came with it, could bring people together. And as the longhouse grows even quieter, you find yourself drifting, caught between the world of wakefulness and the realm of dreams. Now, while we're talking about the sacred nature of sleep, it's important to remember that the Vikings were also very practical people. They knew that a good night's rest was essential for the hard work they would face the next day, whether it was a day of raiding, farming, or defending their homes. After all, the Vikings weren't just fearless warriors. They were also expert farmers, traders, and craftsmen. So, while sleep was a time for spiritual renewal and connection with the gods, it was also about physical restoration. The Vikings understood the importance of rest in a way that goes beyond simple luxury. They didn't have the soft, pillow-top mattresses we have today, but their sleeping arrangements were designed to ensure that they rested as comfortably as possible under the circumstances. It's said that the Viking longhouses were often crowded, with families and entire clans sleeping in close quarters. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Being close to your loved ones at night offered warmth and security. It also meant that you weren't alone in the darkness of the night, and that sense of togetherness was deeply comforting. Historians still argue whether Vikings enjoyed the closeness of communal sleep or if they would have preferred more privacy. Some believe that the shared sleeping arrangements were a way to reinforce familial bonds and foster a sense of security, while others suggest that Vikings, being fierce individuals, may have preferred more space. Regardless of their preferences, it's clear that the communal aspect of Viking sleep had a significant impact on their sense of safety and belonging. And so, the Viking bedtime rituals come to a peaceful end. The stories have been told, the prayers whispered, the bodies rested, and the dreams begin to take hold. The fire flickers its last few embers as the longhouse settles into complete silence, save for the quiet breaths of those who sleep. It's a peaceful moment, one of quiet strength, connection, and the promise of a new day. And as you drift off to sleep tonight, you might just feel a little closer to those ancient Vikings, their routines still echoing through the quiet of the night. As you continue to relax into the quiet of the Viking night, it's hard not to wonder about the deeper meaning of the peaceful rituals that marked their bedtime. While their daily lives were filled with intense battles, harsh climates, and dangerous seafaring, bedtime was different. It was a time to transition, to reset, not just physically, but spiritually. The Vikings, despite their fierce reputations, had their own way of making peace with the day. They rested not only to recover their strength, but to prepare themselves mentally for whatever lay ahead, whether it was another grueling raid or the daily grind of farm work. One fascinating aspect of the Viking bedtime routine was the idea of sleep as an act of restoration. It wasn't just about rest. It was about returning to a state of balance. To understand this better, let's look at the ancient Viking concept of heider, which roughly translates to a kind of clarity or composure of the mind. In a culture where warriors could face death at any moment, achieving mental balance through restful sleep was vital. Sleep, for them, wasn't a passive state. It was an active process of refreshing the soul and preparing for future challenges. Vikings believed that a good night's sleep helped preserve heider. It wasn't just the physical body that needed rest, but the mind too. And this sleep didn't just happen by accident. It was part of the daily cycle of life, steeped in spiritual practices and respect for the rhythms of nature. The Viking way of preparing for bed wasn't just a mechanical process. It had an underlying spiritual intent. Even in their moment of rest, they were constantly in tune with the world around them and the divine forces that shaped their lives. Historians still debate whether these notions of spiritual renewal through sleep were formalized or more of a widespread cultural belief that permeated Viking society. Some argue that the concept of sleep as a way to renew both body and spirit was closely tied to their reverence for the gods, particularly Odin. After all, Odin was the god of wisdom and knowledge, and it was said that those who sought his wisdom had to prepare themselves not only in action, but in rest. It's easy to see how sleep, in the Viking context, wasn't simply a need. It was a way to keep themselves in harmony with their divine beliefs and personal well-being. But let's take a closer look at the practical aspects of the Viking sleep setup. While you might be imagining a cold, uncomfortable mat of straw, or a rugged wooden platform, the reality was a bit more nuanced. Vikings understood the harshness of their environment, and their sleeping arrangements were designed to accommodate the tough Nordic winters. The raised platforms were often covered with layers of furs, blankets, and perhaps even animal pelts, which provided insulation against the cold. This wasn't luxury, it was necessity. When you picture a Viking longhouse, think of a large open space with a central hearth where the family or clan gathered. The sleeping areas would be located along the edges, sometimes with curtains or partitions to provide a modicum of privacy. These sleeping platforms weren't individual beds, but shared spaces where family members or close friends would sleep in close quarters. This tight-knit arrangement likely fostered a sense of security and togetherness that was crucial in Viking culture. The idea of being surrounded by your family at night, under the same roof, with the same warmth, created a comforting sense of safety in a world full of uncertainty. Historians have long debated the role of privacy in Viking sleeping arrangements. On one hand, the close quarters of Viking longhouses suggest a culture that valued communal living, where privacy was a secondary concern. On the other hand, it's possible that for certain classes or in certain situations, the Vikings might have preferred some measure of solitude. Nevertheless, the communal nature of their bedtime rituals reinforced the idea that Viking life was as much about the collective as it was about the individual. It wasn't just about finding physical comfort in your bed. It was about sharing the warmth and security of your clan, knowing that you were all in this together. One particularly interesting aspect of Viking bedtime routines that's often overlooked is their relationship with the natural world. The Vikings were keenly aware of their surroundings, and their understanding of nature influenced everything from their daily activities to their sleep habits. For example, they were deeply attuned to the rhythms of the seasons, particularly the long nights of winter. During the colder months, sleep would take on an even more sacred meaning. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, the Vikings would spend more time inside, huddled together by the fire, waiting for the return of the sun. In many ways, their sleep rituals mirrored the cycles of nature. The Vikings saw themselves as part of the larger cosmic order, with the earth, the stars, and the seasons all playing a role in their lives. During the long nights of winter, sleep wasn't just a time to rest. It was also a time to reflect on the passage of time and the natural cycles that governed everything around them. This deep connection with nature is reflected in their bedtime routines, which were not just practical, but sacred. It was a time to align themselves with the earth's rhythms and prepare for the challenges ahead. Historians still argue about the extent to which the Vikings' sleep rituals were shaped by their environment and beliefs. Some suggest that their connection to the natural world was integral to their sense of identity, while others believe that their practical need for rest and survival in harsh conditions was the driving force behind their bedtime practices. Either way, it's clear that sleep, for the Vikings, was more than just a physical necessity. It was part of a broader understanding of the world, one that tied them to the gods, the earth, and each other. So, as you settle into your own bed tonight, remember that your routine might not be so different from those Vikings long ago. While the world around you is vastly different, the need for rest, connection, and spiritual renewal remains the same. Like the Vikings, you too take part in a ritual that helps you prepare for the day ahead, whether it's battling dragons or facing the challenges of modern life. And in that quiet space, tucked under your covers, you can find a bit of peace, knowing that, like the Vikings, you are part of something much larger than yourself, a timeless cycle of rest, renewal, and connection. As the Vikings drift off into their peaceful slumbers, there's an undeniable connection between their sleeping habits and their spiritual practices. It's almost as though each night they were preparing for something larger than themselves, a battle, a journey, a renewal. The Vikings didn't just rest for the sake of recovery. Sleep, for them, was woven into the fabric of their existence, tied closely to their understanding of fate, the gods, and the cycles of life. It's this intertwining of the mundane and the divine that makes their bedtime rituals so intriguing, so intimate, and ultimately so peaceful. The sense of preparation for the next day was deeply ingrained in the Viking mindset, but it wasn't solely focused on action. In fact, their bedtime routines allowed for a kind of spiritual recovery, which is something modern society has largely forgotten. In today's world, sleep is often reduced to a passive state, a necessary evil to get through another workday. But for the Vikings, sleep was an active, intentional process, a time to spiritually prepare for the unknowns of the coming day, and to connect with the divine forces that guided them. Whether it was a long journey to foreign shores, a raid on a distant village, or a simple day of tending crops, each day carried with it the potential for great uncertainty. And so, sleep became not just a time of physical rest, but a way to prepare for whatever might come next. Before they closed their eyes for the night, many Vikings would pause to reflect as the light from the hearth flickered and the fire began to die down. They would offer a final prayer to their gods. It wasn't just a routine, it was a deeply spiritual act that helped them regain focus and peace. They believed that the gods were watching over them even while they slept, and that their dreams could offer guidance and clarity for their waking life. To the Vikings, sleep wasn't something that happened in isolation. It was part of a much larger cosmic dance. When they closed their eyes, they entered a realm where the gods were close by, where the boundaries between the waking world and the spiritual world blurred. Historians still debate the exact nature of Viking bedtime prayers, but there's no doubt that many Vikings believed in the power of these rituals. It's said that some would whisper the names of the gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, hoping that their protection and guidance would carry them through the night. These prayers were often short and simple, but powerful in their intention. And as the Viking warriors drifted off to sleep, their minds would be at ease, knowing that they were surrounded by a divine presence watching over them as they rested. Now, as you lie in your bed tonight, you can almost feel that same comforting presence, the idea that, in your own way, you're participating in an ancient tradition of preparation for rest. The Vikings didn't just lie down and close their eyes. They took active steps to create a peaceful environment for sleep, both physically and spiritually. And as you listen to the quiet of the night, with the comforting sound of your own breath and the peaceful stillness around you, you can almost imagine the flicker of the Viking hearth, casting its warm glow on the faces of those around you. Their deep connection to the divine didn't end when they slept. It continued in their dreams, which were believed to be channels for the gods to communicate with them. Many Vikings viewed dreams as prophetic, a way for their ancestors to speak directly to them, offering advice, warnings, or insights. The line between the physical and spiritual world was blurry for the Vikings, and this is reflected in how they approached sleep. Dreams were not just a random byproduct of the day's events. They were significant, filled with meaning, and often seen as messages from the gods. And so, each Viking drifted into the world of sleep, wrapped in the warmth of the fire, the comforting embrace of their family, and the protection of the gods. Dreams, while mysterious, were also an opportunity for the Viking to gain wisdom and insight. When they awoke in the morning, they did so with the understanding that they were not alone in the world. They were watched over by a pantheon of gods, each one ready to offer their guidance for the day ahead. In this way, the Viking bedtime ritual was more than just a physical act of sleep. It was a sacred act of renewal, rest, and connection to the divine. Now, you might be wondering how such a deeply spiritual bedtime routine can relate to your own sleep habits. The truth is, while the Vikings may have had their gods and their specific rituals, the essence of their practices can still be seen in our modern routines. We too seek rest, restoration, and renewal at the end of the day. While we may not invoke gods like Odin or Freya before we sleep, many of us have our own forms of spiritual or mental preparation before resting. It could be a quiet prayer, a moment of gratitude, or simply the act of winding down from the stresses of the day. What we can learn from the Vikings is that sleep isn't just an escape from the world. It's an opportunity for reflection, rejuvenation, and reconnection. Whether it's through a simple bedtime ritual, a prayer, or just taking a few moments to center ourselves before closing our eyes, the act of sleep can be far more powerful and meaningful than we give it credit for. Just as the Vikings rested to prepare for their battles and journeys, we too rest to prepare for whatever lies ahead in our own lives. As you settle deeper into your bed, think of the Vikings, how they closed their eyes with the knowledge that the gods were near, that they were surrounded by their loved ones, and that sleep was their moment of peace in an often tumultuous world. You may not be a Viking warrior, but in this quiet space, you too are connected to something greater than yourself, a timeless cycle of rest, renewal, and connection. The night presses on, and as the last traces of the fire's glow begin to fade, the quiet of the Viking longhouse envelops all those inside. The warmth from the hearth lingers in the cool air, but the world outside is growing still. Now, as the Vikings drift deeper into sleep, it's not just the practical aspects of their lives that fade, but their senses, the noise of the day, the clatter of axes, the hum of raiding ships on distant shores. These things dissolve as they enter the world of dreams. For them, sleep is a necessary but precious pause, the calm before the storm of another day's adventures or hard labor. As the world around them becomes quieter and darker, the real journey begins. The Vikings, like so many others throughout history, believed that the nighttime offered a different kind of clarity. It wasn't just a time of unconscious rest, but a space for transformation and growth, both mentally and spiritually. They weren't merely waiting for morning to come, they were engaging with a world outside the constraints of their waking reality. For the Vikings, sleep wasn't just sleep, it was a threshold between the world of men and the world of the gods, where the boundaries between the two often blurred. In the Viking worldview, dreams weren't just byproducts of an overactive mind. No, they were messages, pathways to understanding the future, a kind of supernatural GPS to guide their actions. A dream about a storm at sea might be interpreted as a warning for a coming raid. A vision of their ancestors in the Hall of Valhalla could mean that they were being watched over, their actions and deeds recorded for eternity. These kinds of beliefs were deeply ingrained in Viking culture and became a vital part of their sleep experience. As a Viking, you might wake up in the morning remembering your dreams and spend time reflecting on their meanings. Historians continue to explore the significance of Viking dreams. Some suggest that the vividness and detail of their dreams may have been influenced by their lifestyle, fighting, traveling, and living close to nature. The physical demands of their life could have shaped their sleep experiences. Others believe the Vikings, as seafarers and warriors, saw dreams as critical tools in helping them make sense of their unpredictable lives. Whether the Vikings actively sought to interpret their dreams or merely allowed them to inform their day-to-day decisions, there's no doubt that sleep and dreams were sacred to them. These experiences were intimately connected to their perception of the world and their connection to the divine. But as we all know, it wasn't always smooth sailing when it came to sleep. Even the Vikings, with all their strength and discipline, would face sleepless nights. Perhaps it was the stress of the upcoming raid or the anxiety over a loved one far from home. And just like us, they didn't always sleep soundly. In fact, Vikings believed that troubled sleep or a restless night could be a sign of something amiss, whether it was bad omens or the influence of an unfriendly spirit. To combat this, they would perform small rituals to ensure peaceful slumber. It wasn't uncommon to see a Viking warrior or farmer placing a piece of protective jewelry under their pillow or saying a prayer to ward off nightmares. They took every measure to guarantee that their dreams and their sleep remained undisturbed, despite the spiritual and protective rituals. The Vikings were also aware that sleep needed a certain amount of physical comfort to be effective. They may have been tough, battle-hardened individuals, but they also understood the need for rest in order to function at their best. The raised sleeping platforms in their longhouses weren't just practical, they provided an essential sense of comfort in a world that could otherwise be harsh. And it wasn't just about the height of the platforms, it was the layers of warmth that surrounded the sleeper. Furs, blankets, and even animal pelts were used to line the platforms, ensuring that those who slept would stay warm during the long, cold Nordic nights. For a Viking, sleep wasn't about luxury, it was about survival. But even so, there was something deeply nurturing about this nightly rest. After all, Even the mightiest warriors need time to recover, and as they lay under layers of furs, the quiet hum of the night around them, the world outside seemed distant. The harsh cold of the north couldn't touch them, and for a moment they were protected. The challenges of the day, whether they involved fighting, farming, or navigating the seas, faded into the quiet, dream-filled sleep that followed. Historians are divided on how much Vikings truly valued the physical comforts of their sleeping arrangements. Some believe that the harshness of Viking life meant that sleep was often less comfortable than we might imagine. Others suggest that, despite their rough exterior, the Vikings understood the importance of good rest. After all, there's no way they could have achieved what they did, whether in battle, exploration, or craftsmanship, without having a solid foundation of health, which depended on adequate rest. They were, after all, human, and their physical needs were just as pressing as their spiritual ones. But what does this all mean for us today? As you lie in your own bed tonight, there's something comforting about knowing that the Vikings, in their own way, experienced the same need for rest and renewal that we do. They too faced a hard, challenging world, filled with unpredictable dangers and the weight of responsibility. And at the end of each day, they too needed rest to carry them through. Their rituals, their prayers, their communal sleeping arrangements, they were all part of the same process of preparation. Just as we lock our doors at night to feel safe, the Vikings had their own rituals to ensure that they would face the morning unburdened and ready for whatever lay ahead. As you snuggle deeper into your blankets, consider how the Vikings might have done the same. Their environment was harsh, their lives often unpredictable, but in the quiet of their sleep, they found peace. And that peace, just like theirs, is something we all need. Just as the Vikings prepared their bodies and minds for the challenges of the coming day, we too can rest assured that a good night's sleep is a form of preparation. It's not just about escaping the world. It's about recharging ourselves so that we can face what comes next. As the night deepens and the stars drift across the sky, the Viking longhouse settles into a peaceful stillness. The fire's glow fades to soft embers, the warmth lingers in the air, and the world outside is muffled by the thick walls of the longhouse. It's in this quiet, in this intimate space shared by family and community, that the most profound aspect of the Viking bedtime ritual comes to life. The sense of connection. This is a time where, in the darkness, the Vikings are not alone, even though they may be physically separated by sleep. Their connection to each other, to the divine, and to their ancestors is reinforced in the stillness of the night. Vikings were not just a collection of individuals. They were part of a larger, collective identity. Their social structure was based on kinship, with family ties and clan loyalty serving as the backbone of their society. This sense of belonging didn't just vanish when the sun set. On the contrary, it was during the night that their bonds were most clearly felt. As they lay on their raised platforms, surrounded by family members or fellow warriors, they were reminded that they were part of something much larger than themselves. Their bedtime was not a solitary retreat. It was a shared experience, a reaffirmation of their place in the world. And so, as you lay there in the quiet of your own room tonight, there's something deeply calming about this idea. The Vikings, despite the roughness of their lives, found peace in the knowledge that they were part of something greater, a community, a family, and a culture that valued connection, the warmth of the fire, the proximity of those they loved, and the shared understanding that they were all in this together created a sense of safety that transcended the challenges of their world. This is not dissimilar to the sense of comfort we seek in our own lives. While we may not share the same communal sleeping arrangements as the Vikings, the essence of what they experienced remains universal. The need to be connected, even in our most vulnerable moments. Historians still debate the precise role of family and kinship in Viking society, especially at night. Some argue that the shared sleeping spaces were more about practicality, keeping warm and protecting one another from danger, while others believe that these close quarters reinforced the deep ties that bound the Vikings together. Regardless of the exact motivations, it's clear that the communal aspect of sleep was important. It wasn't just about the physical act of resting. It was about reinforcing the emotional and spiritual ties that kept the Viking world intact. The idea of shared sleep in Viking culture might sound a little alien to us in the modern world. After all, privacy is often seen as an essential part of rest today. But the Viking way of sleeping was about security, both physical and emotional. It was a reflection of their worldview, where every person had a role to play in the greater community. This didn't just apply to warriors on the battlefield, it applied to everyone, from the farmers to the craftsmen, to the elders who passed down stories and wisdom. In the Viking longhouse, there was no such thing as an isolated life. Everyone was bound by a common purpose, a shared experience of hardship, survival, and hope for the future. It's also worth noting that while sleep may have been communal, it was also a time for individual reflection. For many Vikings, sleep offered a moment of introspection, a time to process the events of the day and prepare for the challenges of tomorrow. Though they may have shared their physical space, their minds were free to wander. Dreams became the private realm of each individual, a space where they could confront their fears, hopes, and desires. This personal reflection during sleep wasn't just about escapism. It was a necessary part of maintaining balance in their lives. After all, the Vikings lived in a world filled with uncertainty and danger, and sleep offered them a rare chance to make sense of it all in the quiet sanctuary of their own minds. Historians are still uncertain whether Viking dreams were seen purely as personal experiences, or if they were shared by the community in some way. Some suggest that dreams were a way of communicating with the gods, while others argue that they served as a form of collective storytelling. Regardless of the interpretation, the act of dreaming in the context of Viking culture was deeply personal, yet linked to the larger community. The dreams of a Viking could hold great meaning, not just for the individual, but for the clan as a whole. It wasn't unusual for a dream to be shared the following morning, with interpretations offered by the family or even a local shaman or wise elder. These dream interpretations helped bind the community together, ensuring that everyone's experiences were validated and shared in a meaningful way. As you lay in your bed tonight, Imagine the Vikings in their longhouses, drifting off to sleep, surrounded by their family and community. The warmth of the fire, the soft rustling of furs, and the sound of the wind outside. They were safe in their togetherness, and in the quiet of their sleep, they were prepared to face whatever the new day might bring. For them, sleep wasn't just a retreat from the world. It was an essential part of their daily rhythm, a time to reset, reconnect, and rejuvenate. So, as you settle into your own bed, take comfort in the knowledge that, just like the Vikings, your rest is an important part of the cycle of life. Sleep is more than just a break from the chaos of the day. It's a chance to reflect, to recharge, and to be connected to the present moment, to the world around you, and to the deeper, timeless rhythms of life itself. Just as the Vikings prepared for their dreams and battles each night, we too prepare ourselves for the challenges ahead, knowing that our shared human experience is woven into the fabric of every night's rest. As the night wears on and the shadows of the longhouse stretch across the walls, we can begin to imagine the Viking dreams taking shape. In the quiet of sleep, the world of warriors and gods intertwines. The Viking belief in the divine power of dreams, the way they saw the gods watching over them even as they slept, adds an almost mystical layer to the peaceful quiet of their rest. In the Viking worldview, sleep was never just a physical necessity. It was an opportunity to receive messages from beyond, to learn what was hidden, and to gain insight into what the gods had in store for them. One of the most fascinating aspects of Viking bedtime rituals was the importance of these dreams. In fact, the Vikings were highly attuned to their dreams, seeing them as direct communication from the gods. There are even stories of warriors receiving visions in their sleep that foretold the outcome of a battle or showed them the path to glory. In Viking society, such dreams weren't just personal experiences. They were seen as part of the larger cosmic order. These dreams helped guide decisions, give advice, and warn of dangers ahead. And this belief was not confined to warriors alone. The entire Viking community understood the sacred nature of dreams. Vikings believed that their dreams could hold vital messages that would help them in life, whether it was a warning about a coming storm, a vision of their ancestors encouraging them, or even a dream about a future raid. These dreams were taken seriously. Often, dreams would be shared the following morning in the communal space of the longhouse. The interpretation of dreams was not just an individual act, but a communal one. Elders, shamans, and even fellow warriors would often offer their thoughts on what a dream might mean. This shared interpretation reinforced the sense of unity among the Vikings and the belief that their fate was shaped not just by their own actions, but by divine will. Historians still debate whether the Vikings viewed their dreams as literal messages from the gods or as symbolic reflections of their own desires and fears. Some scholars argue that these dreams were shaped by the Vikings' experiences of their harsh, dangerous world, a way for their minds to process the trauma of battle, long voyages, and the fear of the unknown. Others suggest that the Vikings believed their dreams had real, prophetic power, connecting them directly to the gods and the spiritual realm. What we do know is that dreams played a significant role in Viking life, and they were considered a way to gain insight into both the immediate and the distant future. So, as the Viking longhouse fades into silence, the warriors and families rest, not only physically, but spiritually. Their dreams connect them to a larger world, a world where the gods are never far away, where guidance can be found even in sleep. The idea that sleep brings more than just rest, that it is a time of spiritual and mental renewal, is something that transcends time. Even in the modern world, we still seek meaning in our dreams, looking for answers, for guidance, or just for a glimpse of what tomorrow might hold. And as we settle into our own beds tonight, it's easy to see how, in many ways, our own sleep rituals mirror the Viking experience. We too seek rest, renewal, and guidance. While we might not be raiding distant shores or seeking visions from gods, the need for sleep remains universal. It's a time for our minds to heal, for our bodies to recover, and for us to prepare on a spiritual level for the challenges of the day ahead. In the quiet of our sleep, we are, in a sense, connected to something larger than ourselves, just as the Vikings believed they were connected to their gods through their nightly rest. Historians might debate the meaning of Viking dreams, but it's clear that sleep was an integral part of their culture. It wasn't just about lying down to rest. It was about preparing mentally, spiritually, and physically for what came next. This preparation wasn't just for battles or raids. It was for everything. It was for the day-to-day survival in the harsh Nordic environment, for keeping the community strong, and for maintaining the connection to the divine. The Vikings understood that to be ready for anything, you had to begin your day with rest, both for your body and your soul. Now, as you lay in your bed tonight, think about the Vikings once again. As they settled into their furs, their dreams took flight, offering them glimpses into the unknown. Perhaps they dreamed of gods, ancestors, or distant lands, or perhaps they simply dreamed of peace, a brief respite from the dangers of their world. Whatever their dreams were, they helped them prepare for the next day, helping them regain their strength and focus. And in the same way, our own dreams provide us with a moment of reflection, helping us make sense of the world around us and prepare for the challenges ahead. Sleep is more than just a break from the day. It is a vital part of the human experience. Whether you are a Viking warrior or a modern-day person, the need for rest, the need for dreams, and the need for connection remains the same. So, as you drift into sleep tonight, take comfort in the knowledge that, just like the Vikings of old, you too are participating in a timeless ritual of rest, renewal, and connection. As we continue to explore the Viking world of sleep, we begin to understand that their rituals weren't just about the practical aspects of rest. They were deeply intertwined with the way they viewed the world and their place in it. The longhouse, the fire, the dreams. Each of these elements wasn't simply a part of the night. They were part of a larger cosmic cycle. To the Vikings, sleep wasn't an interruption of the day. It was a continuation of the divine flow, a crucial part of the ongoing dance between gods, mortals, and nature. The idea that sleep is connected to the cycle of nature is something that the Vikings deeply understood. In the harsh, unpredictable landscape of the north, everything revolved around the rhythm of the seasons. Long winters and short summers meant that the Vikings had to work harder during certain times of the year, making sleep during the colder months even more essential. During the winter, when the nights were longer and the days were shorter, rest was necessary to sustain their energy. But it wasn't just about physical survival. It was about maintaining their connection to the natural world. In Viking society, this connection wasn't just metaphorical. It was seen in everything they did, from their agricultural practices to their spiritual beliefs. The rhythms of nature governed their daily life, and sleep was a way to honor these rhythms. The quiet moments of the night, when the world outside was still and cold, were seen as a sacred time. Sleep wasn't just a personal need. It was an offering to the world around them. It was their way of acknowledging the cycles of nature and the gods that governed them. Historians still debate whether the Vikings saw sleep as a spiritual practice, or whether it was primarily a practical necessity. Some argue that their sleep rituals were tied to a belief in the cyclical nature of life, that rest and rejuvenation were essential not just for the individual, but for the community as a whole. Others believe that sleep was simply seen as a way to recover from the demands of the day. But regardless of the interpretation, it's clear that the Vikings viewed sleep as something more than just an individual act. It was a communal ritual, a time to recharge and reconnect with the world around them. Now, as the fire in the longhouse flickers out and the soft sound of the wind howls through the trees, we can begin to imagine the stillness of the night. The Vikings are asleep, their dreams taking them on journeys far beyond the walls of the longhouse. The sense of connectedness they feel in sleep isn't just to their immediate surroundings, it's to the entire universe. The gods, the ancestors, the animals, the land, all of these elements are woven together in the quiet of their slumber. And in our own lives, there's something deeply comforting about this idea. Sleep, as the Vikings saw it, is more than just an escape from the world. It is a way to reconnect with the rhythms of life, to honor the cycles of nature, and to prepare ourselves for whatever challenges lie ahead, whether we're dreaming of adventure, of wisdom, or of a peaceful tomorrow. Sleep gives us the time to heal, to process, and to emerge ready for the new day. Think about it. While we sleep, our bodies are healing, our minds are processing the events of the day, and our spirits are rejuvenating. In this way, sleep is a holistic experience. It's not just about physical rest. It's about mental clarity, emotional balance, and spiritual renewal. The Vikings understood this deeply, and it's something we can learn from them. By honoring sleep as a time for restoration in all areas of our being, we too can wake up feeling refreshed, ready to take on whatever the world has in store. And yet, as we settle into our beds tonight, it's easy to forget the significance of sleep in the grander scheme of life. We rush through our days, dealing with work, social commitments, and responsibilities, and we often treat sleep as just another task on our to-do list. But the Vikings show us that sleep is a vital, sacred time, a time to rest and reflect, to connect with the divine, and to prepare for what comes next. In our modern world, we may not pray to the gods before we sleep, but we can still take a moment to appreciate the power of rest and renewal. Historians still wonder how much of the Vikings' nighttime routines were influenced by their spiritual beliefs, and how much was simply about practicality. But one thing is certain: sleep was never just about rest for the Vikings. It was a deeply spiritual practice, a ritual that helped them stay connected to their gods, their ancestors, and the world around them. Whether they were resting for the next battle or simply recovering from the day's hard work, sleep was their moment of peace, their moment of renewal. As you prepare to sleep tonight, think about the Vikings in their longhouses, gathered together, their bodies resting, but their minds and spirits active in the world of dreams. Sleep for them wasn't just an act of recovery. It was a sacred time to reconnect, to reflect, and to renew. And so, as you drift off into your own dreams tonight, remember that sleep is not just an escape. It's an essential part of the cycle of life, a time to honor the world around you and to prepare for the challenges ahead. As the Viking longhouses settle into complete quiet and the last remnants of the fire die out, the night stretches onward. The only sounds now are the deep, rhythmic breaths of sleeping Vikings, lost in the land of dreams. Their minds are free to roam, exploring distant shores, negotiating with gods, or revisiting epic battles they've fought in their waking hours. In this moment of vulnerability, sleep is their sanctuary, offering peace, renewal, and a connection to the divine. The quiet of the longhouse represents more than just a lull in the action. It's a sacred pause in the ongoing rhythm of Viking life. For the Vikings, sleep was deeply connected to their understanding of fate, the idea that their lives were shaped by the gods and their personal deeds was central to their worldview. And this belief didn't stop when it was time for bed. In the moments before sleep, a Viking might reflect on the events of the day, whether they were victories or struggles. The act of sleep was their way of allowing the gods to influence them. Even in the absence of consciousness, sleep was seen as a liminal space, a time where they could receive guidance, blessings, and warnings from the gods. This connection to fate was so central to Viking beliefs that it extended beyond waking hours. It wasn't just that sleep was a necessary pause in the day, but that it was part of the larger flow of their existence, one that was always watched over by divine forces. During sleep, the Vikings believed their actions, thoughts, and dreams were monitored, shaping the decisions they would make when they awoke. In a sense, their dreams served as divine intervention, an extension of the gods' presence in their lives. Historians still debate the specifics of Viking beliefs regarding fate and sleep. Some scholars suggest that sleep was seen as a time when warriors could be tested by the gods in the form of dreams. Others propose that the gods were seen as caretakers, providing rest as a reward for the day's deeds. Whatever the case, there's no doubt that sleep played a critical role in the Viking conception of fate. It was not merely a time to rest. It was a time for alignment with the divine, for preparation, and for guidance. In today's world, we may not think of sleep as something that connects us to the gods, but there's something undeniably comforting about the idea that sleep could be seen as a continuation of our journey. The Vikings knew that their connection to fate, their role in the larger world, didn't end with their waking hours. It continued in their sleep, in their dreams, and in the very act of rest itself. This understanding, deeply embedded in Viking culture, can remind us of the power of sleep, not just as a physical need, but as a deeply spiritual process that allows us to reset, reflect, and receive guidance. So as you lie in your own bed tonight, consider how sleep is more than just a passive experience. Like the Vikings, sleep is a time to reconnect with ourselves, to process the day, and to allow our minds and bodies to rest. Even if you don't believe in divine intervention through dreams, there's something profound about the idea that sleep is a space for personal renewal, a time for us to receive the mental clarity we need to face tomorrow. Beyond the spiritual implications, sleep was also a time of physical renewal for the Vikings. As harsh as their world was, sleep offered a moment of respite for their bodies. The long hours of hard labor, the cold exposure, and the constant movement left their muscles sore and their minds weary. Sleep, then, became their body's way of repairing itself, of healing the wounds and stress of the day. The Vikings had an intuitive understanding of the importance of rest for physical health. Their sleep, though it may not have been as comfortable as what we are accustomed to today, was designed to serve their survival needs. The cold nights of winter, the endless journeys, and the battles required their bodies to regenerate, and sleep provided the environment necessary for that regeneration to take place. Whether they were sleeping on a raised platform with furs or lying on a simple mat, the essential need for rest remained clear. Historians have studied the physical conditions under which Vikings slept and suggest that while they didn't have the luxury of modern mattresses or pillows, their sleep conditions were well suited to their environment. The raised platforms kept them off the cold, damp ground, and the furs kept them warm throughout the night. In many ways, these physical arrangements were as vital to their survival as their spiritual practices. They needed sleep not only for rest, but to keep their bodies prepared for the next day's challenges. Even in the harshest winters, when the days were short and the cold was unbearable, their sleep rituals allowed them to rest fully and recover. And just as the Vikings knew their physical needs must be met for survival, they also recognized that rest was a key factor in the well-being of their minds and spirits. The balance between body, mind, and spirit was something they took seriously, as evidenced by their complex relationship with sleep. In many ways, their rituals and beliefs reflect the same concerns we have today: how to balance work, rest, and spiritual health. So, as the night draws to a close and the Vikings sleep soundly in their longhouses, take comfort in knowing that sleep has always been more than just an escape from the chaos of life. Whether you're preparing for a battle, a journey, or simply another day at work, sleep remains an essential practice for restoring our strength and clarity. The Vikings, with all their toughness and spirituality, understood the importance of sleep, how it connects us to our past, our present, and our future. And as you settle in for your own rest tonight, remember that your sleep is more than just a way to recover from the day. It is a time to honor your body, your mind, and the world around you, just as the Vikings prepared for the challenges of the next day by resting well. We too can find peace and strength in our nightly rituals of rest. May you sleep soundly, knowing that the act of sleep is part of a larger cycle of renewal, rest, and connection to something much greater than ourselves, as the Viking longhouse remains silent, its inhabitants now deep in the realm of dreams. It's worth reflecting on the unique qualities of their sleep. For the Vikings, sleep wasn't just a necessary part of daily life. It was a multifaceted experience that influenced their entire worldview. Their sleep rituals weren't simply about finding rest. They were about finding balance, understanding their place in the cosmos, and reconnecting with the divine forces that governed their lives. Each night, as they drifted into slumber, the Vikings believed they were entering a world where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms blurred. Sleep, for them, wasn't an escape. It was an active engagement with the mysteries of life and death. The quiet of the Viking night is particularly striking when you think about the physical environment in which they slept. Their longhouses, simple but functional, were designed to accommodate both the practical needs of warmth and the emotional need for communal connection. The longhouse was more than just a shelter from the elements. It was a place where Vikings came together, a space where stories were shared and lives were intertwined. It's fascinating to think that the Vikings, known for their fierceness and bravery, found peace not only in their daily routines, but also in the stillness of their shared spaces. As the fire burns low and the longhouse grows colder, it's easy to imagine the shared warmth of family members, warriors, and fellow clan members bundled up under thick furs, each person's breath merging with the other. The communal aspect of Viking sleep was not only about staying warm, but also about cultivating a sense of unity. The closeness of bodies in the longhouse reinforced the idea of family and clan as a support system. Vikings didn't sleep alone. They slept in the company of those they loved and trusted, knowing that the warmth they shared wasn't just physical, but emotional too. Historians still debate the extent to which Viking society was truly egalitarian, but it's clear that the communal aspects of their culture, especially in sleep, played a significant role in reinforcing their social bonds. The closeness they shared as they slept was not just about survival. It was about connection and protection. Just as the fire provided physical warmth, the bonds between family members and clanmates provided emotional warmth. The tight-knit nature of Viking society meant that even in their most vulnerable moments, they were not alone. This communal sleep, then, was as much about nurturing relationships as it was about practical survival. But the Viking experience of sleep was not without its challenges. In their harsh world, even rest could be disrupted by the demands of the environment. The dangers of raids, long journeys across the seas, and the constant threat of disease or bad weather meant that sleep wasn't always peaceful. But in a way, these disruptions were part of the rhythm of Viking life. Sleep, like everything else, was uncertain. It had to be earned, fought for, and cherished. And yet, even in the face of these hardships, the Vikings found ways to embrace rest and to rejuvenate for the next day. Viking warriors, in particular, had a different relationship with sleep. They lived lives filled with action, constantly on the move, whether preparing for a raid or making the long journey across the seas. For them, sleep was a respite from the relentless demands of their lifestyle, but it was also a time to reflect on their purpose Warrior culture was central to Viking society, and the stories they shared around the fire often revolved around their exploits and battles. Sleep provided them with the time to process the emotional weight of those experiences, to prepare for future battles, and to honor their gods. Historians often emphasize the connection between Viking warriors and their belief in Valhalla, the afterlife for fallen warriors. In their dreams, Vikings could find reassurance that their actions in life had meaning, that their bravery and valor would not go unnoticed. Sleep, in this context, wasn't just about recovery. It was about reaffirming their place in the warrior tradition, knowing that their deeds, whether in battle or in everyday life, were part of a larger narrative. The idea of being watched over by Odin and the other gods was a comforting thought, helping to ease their minds and provide peace before sleep. It's easy to draw parallels between the Vikings' need for rest and our own. We too face challenges in our daily lives. We may not be preparing for battle or embarking on long voyages, but the demands of work, relationships, and personal growth can feel just as intense. And, like the Vikings, we too seek peace and restoration at the end of each day. Our own rituals before bed, whether it's a cup of tea, a quiet moment of reflection, or a simple prayer, mirror the ways in which the Vikings prepared themselves for sleep. The common thread is the need to disconnect from the demands of the day and prepare for what's ahead, allowing ourselves time to rest both physically and mentally. The Vikings, as we've seen, didn't just sleep to recover from the physical toll of their daily lives. They slept to honor their place in the world. Sleep was their way of aligning with the natural rhythms of life, of honoring the divine, and of preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the quiet of their longhouses, surrounded by the warmth of their community, the Vikings found peace and strength, and perhaps, in our own ways, we can take inspiration from their practices by creating a peaceful environment for rest, reflecting on our own dreams, and honoring the importance of sleep in our lives. We too can find renewal and strength for the days to come. So, as the longhouse fades into the quiet night and the Vikings sleep soundly under their furs, we can find comfort in knowing that sleep, like their lives, is an integral part of the human experience. It's a time to reconnect, to rest, and to prepare. As you close your eyes tonight, take solace in the knowledge that you are participating in a timeless tradition of rest, renewal, and connection. Like the Vikings, you are not alone in your sleep. You are part of something larger than yourself, a cycle of rest, rejuvenation, and connection that transcends time. As the Viking world drifts further into the realm of dreams, the night continues its slow passage. The longhouse, though now bathed in the soft glow of dying embers, remains filled with the presence of the community. It is a time for rest, but also for reflection and for the continuation of a cycle that has defined Viking life for centuries. Each night, as the Vikings sleep, they remain connected not only to their family and community, but also to the ancient rhythms of the earth, the sea, and the stars. The Vikings understood that their lives, like the rest of the world, were part of a greater cycle. Each night, as they drifted into sleep, they were not simply retreating from the day, They were reaffirming their place in the natural order, the stars above, the seasons that shaped their lives, and the gods who watched over them all played a role in this nightly renewal. And so, sleep wasn't just a necessary pause, it was an active engagement with the forces that governed their world. This connection to the cycles of nature is something that the Vikings held dear. They understood that sleep, like the seasons, was essential for renewal. Without it, the cycle would be broken, and the strength needed to face the challenges of the coming day would be lost. Just as the earth needs rest during the winter to bloom again in the spring, the Vikings understood that they too needed time to recover in order to be ready for the future. Their sleep rituals were a way of honoring this natural rhythm, ensuring that they would wake up the next day ready to face whatever came their way. Historians have long speculated about the extent to which the Vikings' understanding of nature influenced their sleep habits. Some argue that the Vikings were deeply attuned to the rhythms of the land, their daily routines shaped by the rising and setting of the sun, the changing of the seasons, and the migration of animals. Others suggest that their sleep rituals were more a reflection of the harshness of their environment and the physical toll it took on their bodies. Regardless of the interpretation, it's clear that the Vikings saw sleep as a vital part of the larger cycle of life. It wasn't just about recovery, it was about preparing for the next chapter of their journey, both physically and spiritually. The shared space of the longhouse, with its communal sleeping arrangements, further reinforced this connection to the larger cycle. Families and clans would sleep together, huddled for warmth and security, reminding each other that they were part of a larger whole. This communal sleep was more than just a practical necessity. It was a reminder of their dependence on one another, both in the challenges of the day and in the quiet of the night. In this way, sleep became a social act, a time to bond, to share the experiences of the day, and to prepare for the days to come. But sleep also had a more solitary aspect. As each Viking lay down to sleep, they entered a private space of reflection and renewal. Despite the communal nature of their sleeping arrangements, each individual's sleep was still personal, a time for inner peace and quiet. In this private space, the Vikings could confront their fears, process their emotions, and prepare themselves for the challenges of the next day. For the warriors, this might mean reflecting on their past battles or the uncertainty of future raids. For the farmers, it might mean considering the harvest or the coming winter. Sleep was a time to heal, not just the body, but the mind and spirit as well. Viking warriors, in particular, had a unique relationship with sleep. Their days were filled with violence, uncertainty, and danger, and they needed rest to recover physically, but also mentally. Their lives were defined by their readiness for battle, but they also needed the time to recuperate from the constant stress of living on the edge. Sleep offered them a chance to step back from their warrior identities, to rest their muscles and their minds, and to prepare for whatever came next. This need for mental rest is perhaps best illustrated in their belief in the healing power of sleep. For the Vikings, sleep was a way to regain their strength and clarity, to be ready for the battles of the future. Historians often look at the duality of the Viking warrior, the fierce, unrelenting fighter by day, and the vulnerable, reflective person by night. This duality was reflected in their sleep habits. Warriors might rest side by side with their families, but at the same time, their minds would often be occupied with thoughts of combat, strategy, and the gods who watched over them. The quiet of the night, then, was a time for warriors to regain their focus, to reconnect with their purpose, and to prepare for the next fight. This mental preparation is something we can relate to today. Just as the Vikings used sleep to recharge and reflect, we too need time each night to process our thoughts and emotions. In our busy, fast-paced lives, sleep often becomes an afterthought, a way to escape the demands of the day. But, like the Vikings, we can find peace and renewal in this quiet time. It's a moment to reflect, to prepare, and to recharge for what lies ahead. And as we sleep, we are not simply resting. We are engaging in a process of renewal, physically and mentally, just as the Vikings did. They saw sleep as an essential part of their connection to the world around them, both the physical world and the spiritual one. This deep connection to the cycles of life, to the rhythms of nature, and to the divine made their sleep rituals sacred. It wasn't just about recovering from the demands of the day. It was about realigning themselves with the forces that governed their lives. As you settle into your own bed tonight, think about the Vikings once more. As they lay down in their longhouses, surrounded by family and friends, they were not just resting, they were reconnecting with the world, with their gods, and with each other. Sleep was their time to heal, to reflect, and to prepare for what was to come. And in that moment of quiet, they were able to find peace and renewal for the challenges ahead. May we too find that peace as we rest tonight, knowing that sleep is not just an escape, but a vital part of the cycle of life. The night has fully settled now, and as the Viking warriors, farmers, and craftsmen sleep soundly, their minds are at rest. But in their peaceful slumber, they are also continuing the legacy of their ancestors. The longhouse, with its simple, functional design, now serves as more than just a place to sleep. It is a space where generations of Vikings have come together, sharing the rituals of rest and renewal. And in these quiet moments, there's something incredibly profound about the Viking way of sleep. It's not just a retreat from the harsh world around them. It's a reaffirmation of their connection to history, to their gods, and to the land. In a way, sleep was a kind of bridge for the Vikings, connecting the present with the past. As they drifted off to sleep, they were not just resting their bodies, they were drawing strength from their ancestors and reinforcing their ties to the land. The longhouse was not only a physical space, it was a living testament to the continuity of Viking life, where generations of stories, battles, and triumphs were passed down through the years. As the Vikings slept, they were surrounded by the spirits of those who had gone before them, reminding them of the legacy they carried. Historians still debate the extent to which Vikings believed in the spiritual presence of their ancestors, but there is no doubt that their relationship with the past was an essential part of their worldview. For the Vikings, history wasn't something distant. It was something they lived with every day. And sleep, as sacred and restorative as it was, also served as a time for them to connect with that history. They might have laid down in the longhouse, but their dreams could carry them back to the time of their forefathers. They could hear the echoes of past battles, the whispers of old gods, and the songs of their ancestors. This connection to the past was more than just a memory. It was a living, breathing part of their lives. And so, when the Viking warrior closed his eyes at the end of a long day, he wasn't simply preparing for the next battle. He was also aligning himself with the warriors who had come before him, drawing strength from their experiences and their sacrifices. The Viking way of sleep was, in a sense, a kind of spiritual renewal, where the warrior could rest while still being connected to the traditions and values of his people. Even in sleep, the past was never far from their minds. The communal aspect of Viking sleep also reinforced this connection to the past. Families and clans gathered together in the longhouse not just for warmth, but for a sense of security and unity. They shared the space where their ancestors had once gathered, continuing the rituals that had been passed down for generations. This communal sleep was not just a physical necessity. It was a way of ensuring that the family unit remained strong, that the bonds of kinship were honored, and that the values of the past were upheld. But sleep also provided a moment of personal introspection. While the Vikings were part of a larger, interconnected community, they also had their own inner worlds, shaped by their personal experiences and their dreams. In the stillness of the night, the individual could reflect on their own actions, their own desires, and their own place within the broader narrative of Viking life. Sleep offered the time to make sense of the events of the day, to process emotions, and to prepare mentally for the challenges of the future. Historians often look at the Viking warrior's dual nature, his public identity as a fierce fighter and his private self, shaped by dreams and reflection. It's clear that for the Vikings, sleep was a time to reconcile these two sides of their personality. In the quiet of the night, the warrior could shed the armor of the battlefield and allow himself to rest, knowing that the gods were watching over him and that his dreams were guiding him toward the next stage of his journey. This duality is a reminder that even the fiercest warriors need time to heal and reflect, and that sleep is not just a pause in the action, but a vital part of the warrior's preparation for what lies ahead. This concept of reflection and renewal through sleep is something that resonates today. Just as the Vikings needed time to process the events of the day and prepare for tomorrow, we too need moments of rest to reflect on our lives, our own sleep rituals, whether they involve meditation, prayer, or simply unwinding with a book, are ways of reconnecting with ourselves and preparing for the challenges of the next day. The Vikings may have had their gods and their ancestors to guide them in their sleep, but we too find guidance in our rest, whether it comes from within ourselves, our families, or the larger rhythms of life. As we continue to draw parallels between the Viking way of sleep and our own, it becomes clear that sleep, at its core, is about more than just rest. It is a time to recharge, to reflect, and to connect to the past, to the present, and to the future. The Vikings, with their deep spiritual connection to their history and their gods, understood this better than most. For them, sleep was a way of ensuring that they remained grounded, that they remained true to the traditions of their ancestors, and that they could face the challenges of the coming day with renewed strength. So, as you settle into your own bed tonight, consider the Viking warrior once more as he closed his eyes to sleep. He wasn't just preparing for another battle. He was reconnecting with the legacy of his ancestors, drawing strength from the gods and renewing his spirit. And in that quiet, peaceful sleep, he was reminded that he was part of something larger than himself, a community, a culture, and a cycle that transcended time. May we too find peace in the quiet of our own sleep, knowing that, like the Vikings, we are all part of a larger, timeless rhythm of rest, renewal, and connection. As the Viking longhouse enters its deepest silence and the world outside continues to spin in its endless cycle, we are reminded of the tranquility that sleep can bring. The night, now thick with stillness, holds the promise of peace for all those within its walls. It's in these quiet moments that the true depth of the Viking experience is revealed. Sleep, for them, wasn't simply a necessity of the human body. It was a gateway to understanding, to renewal, and to connection. This final section brings us to the culmination of their bedtime ritual, a moment of calm where everything they worked for, fought for, and believed in converges. The warmth of the hearth has long since dwindled to faint embers, but the comfort it offered lingers in the air. The sounds of the longhouse, soft snores, the rustling of furs, become part of the night's symphony. It's easy to imagine the Viking warrior, exhausted from his day's efforts, lying down among his kin, his body resting, but his spirit still aligned with the world he inhabits. Even as the Vikings sleep, they continue to carry the weight of their gods, their culture, and their community within them. While we may never truly understand the spiritual depth that sleep held for the Vikings, we can recognize that their approach to rest was deeply intertwined with their worldview. Sleep wasn't just the end of the day. It was an active, intentional ritual that helped them maintain their connection to the gods and the world around them. Whether they believed that their dreams were messages from the divine or simply a means of processing the day's events, there is no doubt that sleep was viewed as sacred. It was a time to reset, to recharge, and to reconnect with the forces that governed their lives. Historians continue to debate the significance of dreams in Viking society. Were they seen as literal communications with the gods, or were they a more symbolic way for the Vikings to process the challenges they faced? Regardless of the interpretation, it is clear that sleep was far more than just a physical necessity. It was a spiritual experience, one that connected the Vikings not only to their immediate community, but to a larger cosmic order. Each night, as they closed their eyes, they were renewing their strength, preparing for the challenges of the next day, and reaffirming their connection to the divine. In the quiet of the longhouse, as the warriors, farmers, and craftsmen sleep, there's an undeniable sense of peace. The Viking lifestyle was undeniably harsh, filled with constant danger and uncertainty. But in these moments of rest, they found reprieve. The quiet of the night was their time to recover, to heal both physically and spiritually. and to prepare for the battles and challenges that awaited them. The concept of renewal through sleep is something we can all relate to. Life today may not be as physically demanding as it was for the Vikings, but we all face our own battles. We too need rest, not just to recover from the day's fatigue, but to rejuvenate our minds, bodies, and spirits. Just as the Vikings needed sleep to regain their strength for their next raid or harvest, we need rest to face the challenges of our modern lives. And much like the Vikings, we often look to the quiet moments of the night for guidance, reflection, and a sense of renewal. As the Viking sleep cycle continues, it's easy to imagine how the quiet of the night might offer more than just physical rest. It offers mental clarity and emotional healing. In these moments, when they are surrounded by their community, the Vikings were given the opportunity to restore themselves, not only for the coming day, but for the years to come. Sleep, for the Vikings, was not just about rest. It was a spiritual practice that helped them stay connected to their purpose, to their gods, and to their place in the world. This idea of sleep as spiritual renewal is something that resonates in many cultures, not just the Vikings. While we may not offer sacrifices to gods before we sleep or interpret dreams to guide our actions, we all engage in a form of spiritual renewal when we rest. Whether it's through prayer, meditation, or simply taking time to reflect, we too look to the quiet moments of the night to find peace, gain clarity, and reconnect with our true selves. And just as the Vikings relied on their sleep to heal and renew, we can take comfort in knowing that our own sleep rituals, whatever they may be, serve the same purpose. Sleep offers us a chance to disconnect from the demands of the day, to restore our energy, and to prepare for the challenges of the future. It is a time to renew not just our bodies, but our minds and spirits, just as the Vikings did before they faced the challenges of battle, work, and life in the harsh Nordic world. As you settle into your own bed tonight, take a moment to reflect on the similarities between your own rest and the way the Vikings prepared for sleep. Though their lives were far different from ours, the need for renewal, connection, and peace remains the same. In the quiet of the night, you too are participating in a timeless ritual, a ritual of rest, renewal, and spiritual preparation. As you close your eyes tonight, know that sleep is more than just an escape from the world. It is a vital part of your own journey, a chance to connect with yourself, the world around you, and the divine forces that guide your life. Sleep, like the Vikings, is a sacred practice that prepares you for the challenges ahead. May you rest peacefully, knowing that, like the warriors of old, you are part of a cycle of renewal that transcends time.